if we're seriously talking about the world or the nation going vegan or highly plant-based, we're going to lose a lot of those animals that can be used to help create these carbon sinks. And what are we going to do? We're going to replace them with more of these fertilizer plants that actually contribute a lot more methane than we originally thought they did. This study is very interesting because as people sit here and tell you that, hey, cow farts are the reason that we have global warming, really, they're not any more responsible than the fertilizer that we're using to grow all that amazing kale and spinach and blueberries and strawberries and, of course, soy, wheat, and corn that we feed all the animals. When you have a group of cows on a plot of land and then you use this biomimicry, they call it, to basically mimic as if these cows were out in the wild where they would be in one area and then they move because of predators coming. So you actually are able to move the cows from one plot of land to another. You do two things. You actually get the cows eating the grass, which is what they're supposed to be eating, and then they poop on the grass, and then you move them out of that area so that that grass has enough time to actually grow back. So I think it's safe to say that we don't really understand everything that's going on with climate change. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that really, truly believe that they know what's going on with climate change. But I really, truly also believe that if you're sitting in an apartment in New York City or in Los Angeles or in Dayton, Ohio, wherever it is, you probably don't know what's really going on with climate change unless you've been reading the actual science behind climate change. Because at this point, everybody has their theory. And really, it's their theory that makes the most sense to them. We take coal from the ground, we put it in the air, it heats everything up, and now we have global warming. And now we have melting polar ice caps. And we're going to have polar bears in Brooklyn within the next 12 years. It's just going to happen. This is science. The problem is, and I've been saying this for a while, I don't think we really know what is happening with climate change. I think a lot of the theories make sense, but at this point, I don't think we really understand the full extent as to what climate change is and to why it's happening and all the factors involved. I know there's people who want to just start taking all the cars and replacing them with electric cars and want to replace all the buildings in the country and replace them, with renewable power. I think renewable power is a great idea. I think it has to happen at some point, but there's so many challenges that come along with it. And I really believe that the only truly viable solution to it is a free market solution, is allow entrepreneurs to come up with ideas to help solve the problem. I say this because I know that if government tries to figure it out, it's going to be an expensive, taxing mess, like everything else the government does. And why am I talking about climate change right now? Because there was a report that came out, put out by Cornell University, a study that came out that found, I'll pull it up here, that fertilizer plants emit 100 times more methane than originally reported, which is interesting because when anybody thinks of methane nowadays, you think about cow farts. We think about methane coming from cow farts, and this is the big problem with climate change, is that we have so many people eating animal products, and it's the animal products or the raising of the animal products that is responsible for the majority of climate change, when this, in fact, is actually not even close to being true. Animal agriculture contributes about 10% of the methane that is emitted into the air, which does make it one of the highest sources of methane, but it is by no means the highest source of all of the carbon gases when you take, all things considered, including methane, carbon emissions, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, fluorinated gases. There's so many of these different things. And for the last few years, it's been the animal agriculture industry that has taken the brunt. Now, I don't defend the animal agriculture industry in how sloppy they are in their processes of of raising livestock. It can be done way more sustainably. It can be done with a lot more care. And believe it or not, it can actually be done in a way that that actually can help sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. Okay, so I've just laid the table for a lot of different ideas. Let me take a step back. The reason I wanted to discuss this study right here was because as we talk about methane and we talk about the animal agriculture industry, and by the way, methane is extremely toxic to the atmosphere. It's about the greenhouse gas impact on the atmosphere is about 25 times that of carbon dioxide. So it's not lost on me that methane is a serious problem. But when we start trying to figure out where the biggest sources of methane come from, when we say that the biggest source is the animal agriculture industry, that's actually not true. The funny thing is that before this report was released, we knew that the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases was from natural gas production. So I guess fracking. And we don't really think about natural gas because it sounds so nice, right? It's natural gas. It's like, hey man, it's like gas from like a natural source. And by the way, anytime you see the label natural, you have to be suspicious. If you ever see natural on a food label, like made from all natural ingredients, that's some toxic shit right there. That's going to put you in the hospital. That's going to destroy your liver. Stay away from that crap. And then when we talk about natural gas, it's not like natural gas is any cleaner or better. In fact, it emits more methane and is the highest source of methane of all of the sources of methane. The biggest contributors to methane, okay? These contributors include rice paddy, agriculture, ruminant animals, sewage and waste, landfills, and fossil fuel extraction, storage, and transformation, and also natural gas, okay? So why is this important? Well, when this report came out, I believe this was put out in 2013 or 2014. I'll pull it up for you here. This is basically the report here, okay? And you can pull it up and you can read it. It's pretty long, but you can go through here and you can see exactly what they're talking about here, where they start talking about methane, okay? When this report came out, this study had not come out yet, okay? So in that report, already they were saying that that methane, that natural gas was the highest contributor of methane to greenhouse gases, okay? And that was back when we only thought that natural gas contributed far less amounts of methane into the atmosphere. But now we know that it actually puts out 100 times more than we previously thought, 100 times more methane than we previously thought. And one of the biggest contributors of that is the ammonia fertilizer plant industry, okay, which is basically what all of our agriculture is based off of. All of the, industrial agriculture that, makes all of the food that you see in the grocery store, the produce, and also the meats, because the animals eat all of that produce, all that corn and soy for the most part, and grains that get grown from these fertilizer plants, or from this ammonia fertilizer, all contribute to this number. So why do I care? Why am I even talking about this right now? I'm talking about this because you might run, or you might have seen a documentary like I did, okay, back in the day when I watched Cowspiracy, and they made the case that it's the animal agriculture industry that is most responsible for the greenhouse gas problem that we have right now. There's a little bit of truth to that, and there's a whole lot of not truth to that. And there's all this gray area right in the middle that we need to talk about, okay? So when we talk about methane from animals, when we talk about cow farts, yes, it's a problem. The problem is also the fact that we keep these animals confined in these, concentrated animal, I think they're CAFOs, concentrated animal farming organizations, these just concentrated animal feedlots, basically, where they do this thing where they graze not rotationally, where they do this thing called continuous grazing. And basically what they do is they just graze on the same plot of land forever, and they just completely destroy the soil. So what is coming out now is all of this science behind rotational agriculture, okay? And so the reason rotational agriculture is important is because when you start getting rotational agriculture, you start getting this happening: soil carbon sequestration, okay? And essentially what that means is that when you have a group of cows on a plot of land, and then you use this biomimicry, they call it, to basically mimic as if these cows were out in the wild, where they would be in one area and then they move because of predators coming. So you actually are able to move the cows from one plot of land to another to another. You do two things. You actually get the cows eating the grass, which is what they're supposed to be eating, and then they poop on the grass, and then you move them out of that area so that that grass has enough time to actually grow back. And what you get here, like this study from Michigan State says, when you have these cows doing this rotational grazing and you're moving them from one place to another, and then they can actually poop on the grass and then let the grass grow back, you're able to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, okay? So methane only contributes, I think it's like somewhere between 10 and 15% of the total greenhouse gas problem, okay? Carbon is the biggest problem. And how do we get carbon out of the atmosphere? We use trees, right? We use vegetation. And so what they found was that if you have these cows rotationally grazing, you're able to actually create these carbon sinks where the carbon gets sequestered out of the atmosphere, and that not only helps the carbon, but it offsets the methane produced by the cows. So if you're going to have cows, you're going to have methane. It's just a part of nature. But if you have these cows rotationally grazing, what you do is you create, sure, a little bit of methane because of the cows, but you create an entire carbon sink that pulls carbon out of the atmosphere that not only helps the carbon situation, it's also been proven from this study here to offset the amount of methane being emitted from the cows. So the cow methane is not a problem anymore. Carbon starts to get pulled out of the atmosphere. And why is that so important? Because methane is only has a life cycle in the atmosphere of somewhere between 10 and 12 years, okay? So methane goes up into the atmosphere, and then 10 to 12 years from now, it's gone. Carbon, on the other hand, carbon dioxide, actually stays in the atmosphere for thousands of years. And if you're so concerned about global warming, carbon obviously is the problem that we're worried about. So no, we don't necessarily have to replace all of our cars with electric cars. We probably should find more advantageous, cleaner ways using renewable sources to drive cars, to power buildings, we should have a renewable infrastructure, no doubt about it. But we also don't have to do this thing where we tax people trillions of dollars to pay to completely overhaul the system because we think the world's going to end in 12 years, when in fact, if we want to be serious about this, we should be starting with reforming our entire agriculture system. And sure, you're going to put some farmers out of work, but these are not farmers. These are basically people who plant seeds of corn, genetically modified corn, wheat, and soy that gets used to make products that creates a lot of the problems in our healthcare system. So sure, there's going to be a huge problem with issue with transitioning out of this model, but these farmers could still have jobs doing this regenerative agriculture model, which we see so powerfully. So what does this original study that I wanted to talk about have to do with any of that? Okay, well, if you really think about it, if we're seriously talking about the world or the nation going vegan or highly plant-based, we're going to lose a lot of those animals that can be used to help create these carbon sinks. And what are we going to do? We're going to replace them with more of these fertilizer plants that actually contribute a lot more methane than we originally thought they did. Now, number for number, I mean, I don't know how much that number comes out to compared to animal agriculture. For the benefit of the doubt, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt that, the animal agriculture industry still contributes more methane than fertilizer plants. But if we're talking about replacing, if we're talking about replacing a system that has the ability to actually clean up the problem and replace it with a system that cannot fix the problem, contributes 100 times more of the problem than we thought, not to mention grows food that we know is highly toxic, that we know is completely genetically modified and sprayed with pesticides. So this study is very interesting because as people sit here and tell you that, hey, cow farts are the reason that we have global warming, well, really, they're not any more responsible than the fertilizer that we're using to grow all that amazing kale and spinach and blueberries and strawberries and, of course, soy, wheat, and corn that we feed all the animals. So I'd love to know what you think about this. Where do you stand on this whole climate change issue? Do you think it's the cow farts that are actually contributing mostly to global warming? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Also, don't forget to give the video a big thumbs up because you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and check out more videos coming up every single day. I'll catch you tomorrow. Take care. Peace.